And we're back in Clarice. So first things first, we're going to set up our renders for the paintovers that we will do on frame 1 of the shot. And after that, we will start setting up all of our moving sequences and having the shot looking good in a moving form. Let's just enlarge this a little bit. And I don't have much space, but hopefully we can make this work. And yeah, let's just copy this, and we're going to call this DMP base. And here we'll rename this DMP base matte and DMP base frame 50 S map. And this is just a texture. If you remember, we imported one earlier just like this. And we are projecting it through our projection camera at frame 50. And we're just going to scroll down here to the file name path. And in this folder, let's find our DMP base frame 50. And let's just duplicate this. Disable this. And let's just call this DMP base. And let's scroll all the way down, and in override material, select our new DMP base matte. And if we click this arrow, we can go back to our folder with the material. And here, let's just change the U and the V repeat mode to reset. And we also want to have our camera occlusion enabled. So now we have our DMP base from our environment light, our triplanars, and our ambient occlusion combined into one. You know, all of this that we painted in Photoshop earlier. So this is just the first of those layers that I'm going to be bringing into Clarice. However, what I will need to do is, I will need to create another Photoshop file where I take this render and let's just change this. And what I do is I'll paint in these corners wherever our geometry has occluded the projection and just fix it up for that frame. And if I fix it for that frame and combine that projection with this one, we should have complete coverage over our entire sequence of movement. So I'll keep this layer and I'm just going to duplicate it again. And I'm just going to call this DMP projection coverage. And here, let's duplicate this and just call this DMP proj coverage. And again, just for cleanliness sake, I'm renaming all of this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to project a white image that is the same resolution as our matte painting. So let's just go back into Photoshop for a second. And what we're going to do here is just create a new layer and fill it with white color. And let's save this as an image out. It can be a JPEG, it doesn't have to be good quality. And let's just jump back into Clarice. And here, let's go to File, Import Texture Streaming Map File. And I have my image. And I'll give it the same attributes as my projections. So camera, world, frame 50, camera occlusion, and reset here. And let's just have a look. If we click F, we can zoom into our selected node. Here, let's bring in our white image. And let's just plug it into the color. And here, in our render layer, let's override the material with our new projection coverage matte. And so now we have a black and white mask of where our old projection is showing and where our new projection will have to fill in the gaps. So we can then also save this and bring it to Photoshop and use it as a mask for where we are painting. Okay, so now we have two of these. Next, let's again copy this, and we're going to call this DMP distant for our distant light. And it helps to just copy and reuse the same nodes that you've already got for your images, because all of these settings will already be done. So we kind of get to skip a little bit of the work and just change the path to the file. So distant frame 50. And again, we'll copy this. DMP distant. And here, let's change the matte. And this will help us as well a little bit when we're blending everything together. So now we've got these. Let's set up some additional render passes that we will use to help us paint the frame 1 of this shot. And okay, so now, so far we're using DMP base, DMP distant, projection coverage. Let's also just do a normal render with the environment light, and this will help us have a good solid base for these bits that we only see in frame 1. So let's change the, where is it? The active camera to projection frame 1, or instead of doing that, we can just make sure that we are at frame 1 in the timeline. So this will yield us the same result, as this is the moving render camera and not the projection from frame 1 camera, but they are in the same position on frame 1. So as long as you remember not to move this marker and just have it on frame 1, it'll be fine. So we'll want to render this out because we get a good base for these edges that are currently black. And then in addition, we'll also use our distant light render. And even though this is dark, this still has information in these edges that we will use. In addition, let's also render out an ambient occlusion and a z-depth pass. So all of these together, let me just activate all of the ones I want. So, and we can move this layer here. So we want environment light. Oh no, sorry, not this one. We want this one. Okay. And we want the environment light, the distant light, the DMP base, the DMP distant, DMP projection coverage, the ambient occlusion, and the Z. And I think we could also render out a normal pass, just so we can use it to separate some of the textures over here. And I think in addition, it doesn't hurt to also just go ahead and render a couple of our triplanars. So if we take all of these and just give them enough time for all of them to render, and then just like previously, we will take these layers one by one and save them out using this button in Clarice and bring them into Photoshop. So let's jump over to the Photoshop side of things, where I'll bring in these renders that I already have done. Alright, now we're back in Photoshop. So I've brought in all of these renders that I have done from Clarice. And so we have our environment base, we have our distant light, we have our bricks, another set of bricks, shanties, ambient occlusion, and let's put these here, Z depth, and then projection coverage from frame 50. This is what we see from frame 50. This is the DMP base projected from frame 50, and this is the distant light also projected from frame 50, the one that we had painted earlier and changed a little bit. And I've also rendered out some normal IDs here, just so we can have a little bit of an easier time applying these textures to these areas that are currently missing here. So let's take our projection coverage here, and actually let's move this to the top as well. And if we just enable our DMP base and have that selected, but view this, and then create a layer mask, and we're just going to go to image, apply image, and OK. And so now our projection from frame 50 is only visible in the white areas here, so we know that everything behind it we will have to paint in. So what we can do is we can just, for now, let's change this to screen. This will help us a bit later. This we will change to multiply, these two to overlay. The shanties, I will quickly just key out the absolute blacks, so just 1. So now we have keyed out the background, and if we create an empty layer underneath and select our shanties and merge them down, we have them as a separate element. And our distant light I will set to color dodge, or actually maybe linear dodge, and let's just move this up here, apply our ambient occlusion, and apply our brick textures. And so now if we're working with this is for frame 1, and we have our DMP base frame 50 with the mask above it, we can see exactly where we need to be painting. So all we have to do is fill in these areas to match this area in order to make the two of them merge together into one seamless image. So for now, let's not use our distant light here. Let's take this out, and we'll repeat this same setup, but for the distant light layer separately. So we'll just copy this mask by Alt drag it onto here, and we will render this out as well, but for now let's just group it. Okay, so now we have this. Oop, my apologies. So let's have our normal ID, and let's just select maybe the greens, and we will make that the mask of this layer. And for our bricks, let's just Shift plus Alt drag this in order to create an inverted copy. Or maybe we should go the other way. Yeah, maybe this way is nicer. So we have our darker bricks on the sides and lighter bricks on the tops. And let's bring this back. And we also have our shanties here, which also kind of help out because we got a lot of free detail with them. So let's just we can try setting them to soft light. Maybe that'll look good. And I think we can also copy them to normal and apply curves and then just darken them down. Like, we don't have to be as careful this time around because this is such a small part of the painting. We can just match what we had in our frame 50 in our concept, and it should be good enough. So here I'll just create a mask and select a different brush and paint in a little bit of this layer. Maybe a different one. Is there anything here? No, okay. We'll be satisfied with that. And I think what we could do a lot of, and let's just check. Okay. So there are a lot of good textures here that we are missing out on underneath. So let's just create a layer here and go to our clone stamp tool and change the sampling to all layers, so it will also sample this layer above. And we'll select a round brush, and we will just, if we look here, we will copy some of the areas that are within this mask that have more detail onto the others that don't. So let's just take this and on our layer underneath, paint in a little bit of that same texture, and let's just keep referring back. Okay, here there's a big gap, so we can just copy this. Oh, whoops, keep doing it on the wrong layer. We can just copy this texture into here. Where else? Okay, this whole area. It's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, okay. So this whole area we can make a bit better. Here as well. And this doesn't have to be perfect. You will see these patches so little on the screen that you're not really going to notice any problems with them. So they don't have to be perfect at all. We can just fill this in quite roughly. Yeah, here let's fill in a bit of this wall. And let's copy a bit of this. And there's going to be smoke and everything, so this will be really unnoticeable. Okay. Here I think we can't see anything anyway, if we look in these little gaps. So I think we can get away there. All of these bits are mainly good enough, to be honest. It's quite unnoticeable that there are any actual problems. Yeah, maybe there a little bit. Okay. Here. Yeah, this whole patch here, I think. Oops, again. Okay, cool. I think here maybe we can paint in a little bit of whatever. Okay, cool. And now we want to move on to this area. And here let's just take some of this texture from the trees and paint that onto the trees here. This really doesn't have to be perfect, it's not going to be very visible. I've got a feather on my selection tool. Let's paint this in here. Paint in a little bit of this texture here. And the aim is to have these textures that are cutting off flat carry across to our outside painting, because then we don't see this big line where all of these textures are getting separated and it's obviously a projection. So here, for example, we want to keep most of that same. Okay, let's take more of this and paint it into the, maybe let's select some kind of a leaf brush. It doesn't matter. Okay, paint in a little bit here and here. So it looks a little bit overgrown. We're just trying to fill this with textures, really. Okay, that's, I think, good enough for that area. Let's have a look here. So this area can be made a little bit better. So we could just select a normal brush again and just copy a bit of this. Maybe, actually, let's select the reds here. And if we click Ctrl H to hide our selection, let's just paint some of this onto some of these surfaces so they kind of match that one. And this instantly kind of unifies the image. Maybe make this a bit darker with the burn tool. And maybe let's just copy a bit of this here, and a bit there. And here we kind of want to copy a bit of this, just so it looks like the exact same texture. Okay. And here at the top, let's just copy this. I just want this to be unnoticeable. This doesn't have to be good at all. No one is going to really notice this part of the image much at all. Okay. Here as well, we need to unify this a little bit. Oh, whoops. Let's make that the same there. And let's just paint a little bit in here. This can be quite rough. And here we want to match the texture a little bit. Okay. Let's move down to the bottom, fill in these stairs, paint in a little bit of this texture here, just constantly trying to remember where these edges are. And some clone stamp works well enough for what we need. Okay. Cool. Let's copy this here. And these steps. Alright, so now basically we've painted in something that roughly matches what we had on frame 50 for frame 1. So of course you can go into a lot more detail with this and make it look much more perfect, but I think you understand the idea. We're just trying to kind of match this up so that when we combine these two projections, they work seamlessly together. So basically we are going to just group this all, and we're going to call this base. And now let's just have a look at our distant, and let's see if this needs any fixing as well, just very quickly. And for this layer, it's much less crucial to get the details to match up perfectly, because we are only really going to be getting through the main lighting in the center, but let's just quickly match up any areas that have clear mismatches. For example, here is a bit of a difference in quality. We'll just match that together, and that's just because one is a proper render and one is that I've edited in Photoshop, so they're a little bit different. So let's just connect this like this. Nice. Here we can make this a little bit brighter. Oops. Okay. That all works. I think maybe here we can do even a bit more. At the bottom we'll have to fix a lot, but let's go through these top areas. All good. Here is a bit too dark. We could just maybe try to use the dodge tool a little bit. Oh yeah, look, and we can match it in perfectly. And then here a little bit of burn tool, because it's too bright. And then here again a little bit of dodge tool. Burn tool in the corner. Here it's hard to tell. Okay. And let's just copy a little bit of this, like so. Okay, so now we have this as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and export it out. And what we're going to do is call this our, if we change the format to TIFF, we're going to call this our DMP base 01 frame 01, because this is what we will be projecting onto our first frame. And then we will take our distant light version of the same setup and render this as, where do we have it? DMP distance 01 frame 01. And so next up we are going to be bringing this back into Clarice, and we're going to start combining these projections into one coherent setup, and then we will render that as a sequence and comp it in Nuke. Okay, let's go.